Everybody, it's Meme Tech here, back again with another quick video. Today I just wanted to talk to you guys real quick about Apple Pro RAW. Apple Pro RAW is basically Apple allowing you to take raw images from your phone and pretty much tinker with it more so than you could with a regular photo. Let me explain. So you can work with. If you're a photographer, you should know that raw files allow you to do a lot more editing and allows the camera to capture a lot more data than a typical JPEG would. With JPEG images, your camera will pretty much do the image processing for you with its own color science and its own image processing, and then you'll have a little room to work with editing when it comes to highlights, shadows, temperature, clarity, texture, etc. when it comes to your editing apps, if you choose to use Lightroom, Snapseed, or just edit from your regular Photos app that comes with your phone. You'll have a limited range of workspace, but when you capture your images in RAW, you have a lot of data to work with. There's going to be a lot of detail in the shadows and highlights and lots of stuff you can work with and tweak with to make the image your own and pretty much do your own processing as opposed to having the AI do it for you. Now with Apple Pro RAW, Apple Pro RAW allows you to capture raw data files, but it also will include the Smart HDR, it'll include the Deep Fusion, and even night mode. So you'll still be able to have all those details and all those raw details while having the Smart HDR in there for you, and Deep Fusion and night mode. And Deep Fusion is basically where the in-between of night mode and regular mode, where it'll capture a lot of detail in low light but not too low light where night mode is needed, and it's supposed to capture pretty much a lot of texture detail, like the fine details you'll find in sweater or yarn or fur. Those fine little minor details should be enhanced and really brought forward in the image. Now let me explain more about Pro RAW and what you can do with it. Pro RAW images. How do you take pictures in Pro RAW? Well, I'm going to show you in the screen recording over here is that first you just go into camera mode, you go to formats, and you'll see Apple Pro RAW under high efficiency, most compatible. Enable that, and you'll be able to capture images in Apple Pro RAW. To manage those files, now RAW files will be big files. JPEG files will be like decent size, but with all the data that your camera will be capturing with a RAW file, you're gonna have a lot of detail in there, and a lot of detail means a bigger size file basically. So you can edit these photos in Lightroom, Snapseed, and the stock photo app as long as it's compatible and able to read DNG. DNG is standard digital negative, so you'll know if your images are in Pro RAW or regular when you see that DNG logo in your image. So if you're opening the file in Lightroom, for example, you will see DNG as opposed to just nothing being there. And you'll also notice that the Pro RAW image will be overexposed. Most of the time when I take my pictures in Pro RAW, it's going to be overexposed, but that will be easily brought down in the highlights, easily brought up. Shadows can be brought up. You can do a lot with it. I'll show you an example pretty soon in a later clip of what it looks like when you're editing with Pro RAW and what it looks like when you're editing with a regular image, and the amount of detail that you have to work with in between the two images with RAW and JPEG. Obviously, transfer Pro RAW images in between iOS devices. You can do it via AirDrop. You can do it via email. You can do it in a number of different ways. So you can edit Pro RAW on different devices, and not just on your iPhone or your iPad. You can do it on the PC. You can do it on your Mac. You're able to do this, and always make sure you go into properties and see if it's a DNG file. If it's a DNG file, then you know you're working with a Pro RAW photo. Now let me show you an example of what it's like to edit a Pro RAW photo and a regular photo. So as you can see here, we have DNG and JPEG. I'm going to show you what it's like to edit with just a regular JPEG photo. So we got Chewy here, and I like upping contrast in my photos. I always up it to 15. The highlights are okay. We don't have to turn them down too much. Shadows, I don't want to crush them, but I do like having that little dramatic effect as opposed to having it way up here is kind of washed out. So I do like bringing the shadows down for a little dramatic effect. The whites can be left alone. Blacks, if you want to go with the little matte type finish, you can go 100%, but I do like the dramatic look. I do like crushing the blacks a little bit when it comes to photos like this. Color temperature, Let's do a little slightly warm. Turn up the saturation just a little bit, but not too much. No, I don't like how orange the lamp gets in the background. I do like the texture being at around 10, 13 range. 19 range. When it comes to objects, I like it being maybe 19 range. I do like vignetting to make the subject stand out a little more. The hazing I mess with a little bit. Then I always like the sharpness being at 25. You'll see, like when we work with the raw photo, that the sharpness is already at 50. So yeah, that's okay. So here's the before. It looks a little washed out. And after, we have a little more dramatic feel to it. We'll export that. Alright, so let's work with the DNG file. As you can see here, the DNG file, which is the ProRAW file, is overexposed. So I first like to turn on the highlights at 100%. Then I'll turn down the exposure a little bit. We're losing detail and chewy, but don't worry, we'll bring it back with some shadow lifting. Shadow lift to like 81. Bring up the exposure a little bit. Turn down the shadows a little bit. Bring up the contrast. Bring up the whites a little bit. Might bring up the blacks. Color, it already has the color for me set at 4,450 Kelvin. But I want it to be just a little warmer. Notice the tint's already at 27, so if we turn down the tint, it's going to be hella green. So we want that tint to be at 27 as it was set. Make it a little vibrant. Make it pop a little bit. Now you can see clarity is already at 8% or 8 plus. I'm going to bring that back up to 19, bring up more detail. I do like having lots of texture in my photos like this. We can turn down the dehaze to bring up a little more light. Vignette a little bit. Detail's already at 50, so we don't need to add any more detail to Chewy. So here's the before, where it's overblown to hell. And then after. So you can see that you can get all the information back. You would think everything is blown out, but you can bring back all that information because you're working with a raw file. So we'll export that to camera roll. It's going to render nice and fast. So now you can compare the two. You have the regular JPEG that you edited, and then you have the raw file. As you can see, there's not that much difference between the raw file and the JPEG after editing. But like I said, with the raw file, you do have the you have a bigger thing to work with, more to work with when you're working the raw file between these two. It's not the greatest example since there's not a lot of color here, but it's almost indistinguishable. God, I cannot say that word. Cut. You can barely tell the difference between the two. But let's see what happens when you try to turn on the highlights to negative 100 like you do in the raw file. Notice the lamp in the background looks like complete crap. Let's see what happens when you lift the shadows up. Washed out. So you can bring them all the way down. Kind of crushed. But mainly it's the highlights that you cannot really mess with when it comes to raw files. If you turn the highlights too much, things do get weird. But in the raw file, you have the highlights down to minus 100. And if you add 100, it gets blown out. You can counter that by having exposure all the way down, but nah, man. So we're gonna leave that the way it was. And now the images are practically the same, although the highlights do look pretty bad in the lamp still. So we'll bring that down. So that's basically editing ProRAW. Let me get something that's better. Hold on. Got the Simon Says thing in front of me, right? So we're gonna do a regular JPEG and a RAW file. So we're going to edit that in Lightroom as well. Bring it back. Alright, so we got the DNG of this file. And this is a good example because it's blown out because of the backlighting here. So highlights all the way down, still blown out. Exposure, bring it down, bring it down. So we're always going to have that light back there because it's a really bright backlight. But we can always do this if we really don't like it. We can always like crop it out and it's fine. So that's one way to get rid of that one highlighted thing in the background, but still see the highlights come up. It's still back there. So bring everything down and it's not as bad. Bring up the contrast, make it really punchy. And bring up the shadows a little bit. Unless you want to do dramatic look and crush the backs a little bit, you can do that, but I'm gonna bring it up just a tad. I'm gonna bring down the blacks a little bit here. Bring down the whites. So we got a lot of white. And give it a slightly warmer look. Don't make it green. Keep that tint the way it is. Bring up saturation, bring up the vibrance, make it really punchy since we have these colors here. Texture 18, clarity 18, nice and detailed. Little vignette to make it the subject in the center. Sharpness is fine, optics is fine, before and after. Look at that difference. It's the power of DNG, the power of RAW files. Now if you had it just in JPEG, which apparently I don't, let's get a JPEG photo of this real quick. Alright, so again, this is JPEG. Highlights brought all the way down, exposure all the way down. Notice how the oranges look bad already. We can't do the same edit with a JPEG file. There's almost no saving this photo. I mean, I'm not trying to save it as much, but hey. Notice you bring the temperature up, the color and brightness of the picture goes up. So if we do the same settings on the JPEG, it will not look as good. I gotta go back and see what the DNG is. So here's the DNG. And here's the JPEG. Which do you prefer? Apple Pro RAW real quick, a little quick demonstration. It's nice, you get a larger file, you get more data to work with, you can edit your photos how you want them to look instead of having the iPhone do it for you. And the photos off the iPhone with the JPEG files look great. You just don't have a lot of room to edit with, especially when it comes to highlights and shadows, and exposure. But when it comes to the RAW files, you have a lot to work with. There's more room, and you can make the image look the best you could make it look when it comes to editing photos straight from your phone. So I do like this. I'm glad Apple brought it out. And I use it a lot. I do it a lot for my cats. I'll show some examples of some DNG files that I exported and edited by using Apple Pro RAW. It's pretty good. So if you know what you're doing with photography, you know how to edit your photos, I highly recommend you try Apple Pro RAW and let me know in the comments of what you think of it. Thanks for watching. Hit that like button, subscribe, and stay tuned for my next video next week. Or sometime this week. I'm gonna try to get another video out this week. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Peace.